The next matter to come before the court this morning is in re J.R. The agency has waived oral argument this morning. You'll have 15 minutes in which to present oral argument. Please don't use the names of any victims or minors as we are recording today's proceedings and it will be posted on the court's YouTube channel. We've read the briefs. We're ready to proceed with the morning. Thank you.
Good morning. May it please the court, I am Susan Panofsky from the Legal Defender's Office of Summit County, and I am here this morning on behalf of J.R. This case is about one fairly straightforward question, and that is whether or not when the officer asked my client about a gun, specifically whether it was real or fake, was that a permissible question? The trial court found that at that moment, my client was in custody. So that would require Miranda warnings. There were no Miranda warnings at that time. The finding by the trial court was that was okay because it was a safety issue. And your honors, that is what is in dispute. Whether or not asking the juvenile who was in custody if the gun was real or fake, is that truly a safety issue? The way the questioning came about at the suppression hearing was this. The officer testified that he had escorted J.R. back to the car to retrieve a cell phone. After J.R. stepped away from the car, the officer noticed the butt of a gun and immediately asked the juvenile if it was real or fake. When the prosecutor was eliciting this testimony, she interrupted and asked the officer if that was a safety issue or if it was to find out if the gun was real or fake. And I may have just added a word in there, so let me make sure I didn't. The question was, and if it was a fake gun, would it be either illegal or, was that a safety issue? Is that question to determine whether or not the handgun was real or a toy? And the answer was yes. It's kind of a compound question. So, your honors, what I'm asking this court to consider is kind of a so what at that point. It didn't matter if the gun was real or fake, or a toy. The officer would have treated it the same way, and that is what the officer testified. In fact, the officer's answer originally, and I'm just looking at the transcript on page 26, when asked what he asked the young man, the officer said, I asked him if it was a real gun or fake gun. The prosecutor inquired, and why did you ask him that? And the answer from the officer was, we get a mix of both in vehicles. The answer wasn't because it's a safety issue. It's not a bomb. It is a gun. And whether it's real or not real, it will be treated the same way by the police officers. The car that the gun is in the officer's custody. There was no testimony that there are other people around. The car is secured, the individuals are secured, there's more than one officer there. The cases where questions have been found to be exceptions based on safety are extremely different. They're extraordinary cases. For instance, the Santiago case that was cited in the brief. Those are cases where there is a life or death situation at that moment. This is not such a case. Even if safety were partly motivating such a question, hypothetically, that still would not be enough to make it an exception to the Miranda requirement. The simple question is, was the young man in custody? And was the question likely to elicit an incriminating response? And the answer is yes to both of those. The trial court specifically found he was in custody, and that question is likely to elicit an incriminating response. This was also not like in Quarles, where the officer needed to ascertain the location of something of some danger. The officer had already located it. That was the reason for his question. So speaking of questions, that is the sum of my argument. So if you have questions, I would like to answer them.
I have a question. So with the suppression hearing and the ruling by the trial court did not suppress the gun, obviously, and did not suppress the statement that you're talking about. I guess I'm just confused. It did suppress the statement where the defendant was saying he was taking the gun home looking for his father. I guess I'm confused. How is this prejudicial? So he said the gun was real. Why is that important?
Okay, so basically how is that incriminating when the young man answers that? Because that would tend to show he knew it was there, that he was aware of its location. And potentially that it could be loaded, and there's a difference between a loaded and an unloaded gun in a motor vehicle, because that's what makes it improper. I would also, I guess, say, if that question, let me put it another way, because that question could have led to further questioning under the Ohio Constitution, that would make that further questioning suppressed as well. It's kind of a moot point here since the further questioning was already suppressed. But anything after that question, is the gun real or a toy, anything derived from that would be, I guess.
So that would show that he knew about the gun, not necessarily that he placed the gun there or anything else.
Correct.
Because the actual statement that showed that he had the gun in his possession and placed it there was suppressed.
Well, Your Honor, in these cases, anybody in the car is quite often prosecuted for the gun, regardless of where it is or how many people are in the car. Any other questions? All right, thank you, ladies. It's very nice to see you.
Court will take the matter under advisement. We will issue a written decision, which will be mailed to all parties to this appeal, as well as posted on the Ohio Supreme Court website.